Philip, one of the other articles I read recently, I guess you wrote it last year, was about the false narrative of the decline of rural Canada. As somebody who lives in rural Canada, I was very interested by that. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's going on there?
Well, we saw during the pandemic that people, and this, has been happening in pandemics going back thousands of years. People leave crowded cities and go back to the countryside. I mean, William Shakespeare, Isaac Newton did some of their best work during plagues when they left London and went back out to the country. And we saw that happen over the last couple of years after the pandemic. People left cities and moved out to the country. And that seems to be sticking. It's not just something that we left and then after the pandemic we're coming back. You look at downtown vacancy rates, you look at the office towers, they're still largely empty in most of the major cities of this country. They're operating at 40, 50% capacity. So clearly some of this move out of the city, some of this move towards working from home is going to be permanent. And that working from home, I mean, and it's related to very high house prices. That the further out you go, the lower the price of home. And for a lot of people, this is the solution to the housing crisis in this country, is to move way out into the country, telecommute most of the time, maybe go into the city once or twice a week if the boss wants you. But that seems to be a working model that is acceptable to a lot of people. So this may have a lot more legs to it than people think. And a lot of those, fancy, very expensive subway systems we built next to very large office towers downtown, those may turn out to be the dinosaurs in our society.
Well, that it does make you wonder because, as you know, a lot of the focus of governments now is to keep building up that kind of infrastructure. But if nobody's using it, that is a massive waste of taxpayer money.
Well, in fact, just the opposite. What we should be doing is exactly what the Legault and Ford governments in Quebec and Ontario are doing, which is building highways. We don't have a shortage of subway capacity in this country. We have a shortage of, as any driver will tell you, of highways, particularly connecting suburban areas and rural areas to each other and not to downtown. So, we've been spending a lot of infrastructure in the wrong place. As I say, some governments are starting to figure that out and are putting our infrastructure money where it's needed, but we're probably spending too much still on expensive, green energy transition projects that are for urban transit that are in fact operating at only 50, 60% of capacity.
Yeah, and we've seen it in other countries like the UK, for instance, where the more you are dependent upon some types of transit, the more if they're striking, you can't get anywhere. Then there's this war on the car that's happening in the city of London too. So these could be trends that we'll be facing in Canada.
Yeah, well, I just came back from Paris and London, and as you mentioned, and yeah, it's hard to imagine, even with all the infrastructure investment these people have put into developing their downtowns, it's still hard to imagine getting around. I mean, these aren't very tall cities. This isn't like New York. They didn't go straight up. They're very flat, and as a result, you're going to need very good transportation to get around horizontally. And it's hard, as I was walking around London and Paris, I was having a lot of trouble imagining being able to do this without ready access to cars and taxis and so on.
Right.
So we're going to need cars a lot longer than I think a lot of people imagine.
A quick question. We got about a minute to go. You also mentioned the cultural divide between urban and rural dwellers. Do you think that's increasing?
Oh, I think very much so. I think, it's, again, I go back to Francois Legault, I think is a politician who's really put his finger on this. And I think Doug Ford also picked up on this. They didn't win their elections in downtown areas of large cities. Legault, I think, maybe at most got one or two seats on the island of Montreal. And Doug Ford had very minimal support in downtown Toronto as well. They got their votes on suburban areas and rural areas. And that's hardly a new formula. Daniel Johnson, a lot of people forgot that Daniel Johnson in 1966 defeated John Lesage, the father of the Quiet Revolution in Quebec, by putting together a coalition exactly like Francois Legault did of suburban areas, rural areas, small businesses, farmers, and he made it work.
We're just going to take a brief break, Philip. We'll be back with you. Please stay with us. We'll be right back.